All right, folks, welcome. This is our first full episode of the Spiritual Formation for the Family podcast. This is something that we at our church here in Central Baptist Church of Jacksonville, Texas, are producing primarily for our church family and even more specifically for the families within the family ministry. So essentially for us, that's everybody who still has kids in the home or young married couples who are anticipating starting a family of their own in the near future. And so this podcast is simply a resource for us to minister to our people. However, if you are outside of that realm, of that scope, if you don't attend Central Baptist Church, or if you're abroad and this podcast can bless you in any shape, form, or fashion, we would love that. So, with that being said, we are starting a 5-week series, and nearly everything that I do, I'm not an original creator. I want to make sure that everybody understands that nearly everything that we do here at Central, we are in some way adapting from somebody else. And so there is this resource that we have recently found that I would encourage everybody to participate in. It's called Practicing the Way. It spawned from the book, Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. And then he, and I can't remember, I think it's the Circle group, went on and made a website called practicingtheway.org. And it is one of the most fantastic resources for spiritual formation. But like with any curriculum, you can just take the curriculum as it is, and it is fantastic. I want to be very clear on that. But for us here in Jacksonville, Texas, we want to take this curriculum and shape it to mold and fit within our context and within our needs as best as we possibly can. And so this is session 1 on the generosity practice. Like I said, there's going to be 5 sessions on this, and we feel like this is so important for our church and for our family ministry that we want to get this out in more than just, like, say, our Sunday school or our home group settings. Like, we want to make this available to all of our people, even if they miss a session. So one of the reasons why generosity is such a big topic for us right now, there's actually a couple reasons that go into this. We at Central do not talk about money very much. And I don't think that we need to talk about money very much. For the most part, we have an incredibly generous church when it comes to tithing, when it comes to all sorts of things that are going on. But in the last 2 years, I'll even say another specific area of generosity, like we do a dessert auction every year, and it is nothing. And I literally mean it is nothing for us to raise $70,000 in an hour for missions and for student ministry trips and different activities that are non-budgeted. So very generous church. But one of the things that our church is facing, that many other churches are facing right now, it's not just a Central Baptist problem, it's something that a lot of churches in the state of Texas are facing, is our insurance premiums have gone out of the roof. All right. In fact, one of the most significant insurance companies that has insured companies in the state of Texas this year decided to completely pull out of the state of Texas, leaving churches like ours really in a bind and strapped for cash because, like, for example, with us, we have seen our insurance premium go up 400% in a 2-year time period, which is pretty crazy. I mean, we have a very nice building that we've been very blessed with, and so that has put some weight on us that we have not been used to. And then the second thing for us here at Central that we have found, and by the way, I'm on the ministerial staff, I'm the family pastor. Nobody on our staff, including our senior pastor, knows what any person gives or does not give at Central Baptist Church. That is not information that we go and look. However, we have done a study and we have found, I think the number was 52%. 52% of our households at Central have not given 1 penny in the last couple of years. And so there's a number of reasons that could be the case, and we want to be sympathetic to all those things. We know that inflation has gone up. I want to say inflation's gone up like close to somewhere between like 20 and 25% in the last 4 years. So there's families that are really, really hurting. We get that, and we feel that, and we don't want to put shame or guilt on somebody. We also know that sometimes people don't steward their money well, and the first thing that goes when you don't steward your money well is charitable giving. We also know that people might look around at a building like ours and at ministry like ours and think like, well, what is my money even going to do? Like that church seems to be doing really well. And we also know that there's distrust for churches in general about money. We have seen, how many times have we seen in the media where a prominent church gets completely exposed as being very bad stewards or just downright dishonest with funds that were coming in. And we see these kind of TV pastors, and so I'm sure that there's some of them that are out there that are good, but we see lots of TV pastors that are like, hey, I'm going to use your money, and I've already got a luxury jet, but I'm going to go purchase a new luxury jet. And so it's just, there's all sorts of reasons why people may or may not give. But one of the fundamental reasons I think that people don't give is the same reason that I struggle with it. My wife and I, probably about 8 or 9 years ago, I'm going to give you this story. Courtney and I, about 8 or 9 years ago, we decided to start tithing. Now, I was already on staff, and we were giving some, but we weren't giving 10% of our income. And by the way, we're going to address the tithe in future sessions because that's something that is kind of complicated, especially in the New Testament. But, we had always been taught, like, hey, give 10% out of your gross, not out of your net. And we were not tithing around 8 or 9 years ago. And so we went by, we did our finances, and we realized, like, oh my gosh, like, we're not tithing. We are giving a portion of our income to the local church, but we're not tithing to the local church, which means 10%. So we prayed and sought God and felt like He was giving us the conviction to tithe, to give 10%, and it was going to hurt us. At that point in time, I can tell you we were not good stewards with our finances. We were, still freshly married, not newly married, but freshly married. So as a result of that, we just, I don't know, we had things that we were kind of struggling with. I take that back. It was actually about 11 years ago when this happened. We were newly married. And so we finally just determined, like, okay, we're going to write a check for our church that represents 10% of our income, of our gross income. And for me, it was like, oh man, it was terrible. I don't give with a healthy heart most of the time. Money is something that I stress over very easily. I kind of take care of our budget, but my wife takes care of writing all the checks, and there's a reason for that. I don't like seeing that money go out, regardless if it's to a bill or a tithe or whatever the case may be. So in our marriage, we realized, like, hey, I'll take care of the budget, but if you can take care of writing all the checks and sending the cash where it needs to go and things like that, it just helps us. And so I really struggle in this area. And I have no reason to struggle in this area. God has taken care of us. And I'm going to tell you one of the ways that He has taken care of us. I'm going to tell you how I still struggle with this today, and you're going to think that I'm crazy. So when we wrote that first tithe check, we knew that it was going to hurt. We knew that we were going to have to change some of our patterns and our habits and things like that. But we took that and we committed that to God. We trusted Him that this is what He wanted us to do, and we allowed ourselves to be obedient in that. And it was crazy. That was at the beginning of the service. This was back when we used to pass the plate. We don't pass the plate right now, but back when we did, it was relatively early in the service. We put the check in the offering plate, and I was just like, oh man, this is tough. No longer, it probably 45 minutes later, service ends, and somebody comes up to us, a church member that I at that time I knew, but I wasn't very close to. And they just said, hey, Coby, look, this is just something I want to give to you. I won't share all the details of the conversation, but in essence, it was like, hey, this is something I want to give to you. I don't know why. I just woke up this morning, and I felt like this was something that I needed to do. And so, here's a gift, essentially. And so it was an envelope. I opened up the envelope, and inside was I can't remember if it was check or cash, but what I do remember is that it was almost exactly the dollar amount that we had just given in our tithe. And it was just this like overwhelming sense of like, okay, when we trust God with our finances, He's going to take care of us. Now, here's the deal. This is not prosperity gospel. I don't think that we're going to have an abundance In fact, I think of like Proverbs 30, where the prayer that is given in Proverbs 30, and I can't remember the exact verses off the top of my head. I can look that up for you guys really quickly. But the prayer that is given in Proverbs 30 is that God, don't give me more than I need, and don't give me less than I need. And so, I think that like that's the general rule of thumb that we see when we commit to God things like our finances. And so, yes, there are going to be people who commit to God their finances and they still really struggle. Yes, there's going to be people who commit to God their finances and they have excess. But I think for us, like I said, the key principle that we see for the most part is that when we commit to God our finances, we're going to have what we need. And let me look up that passage for you guys really quickly. Proverbs 30. And it says, I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared for this. And now I am looking for it. Oh, yes, yeah. Proverbs 30, verses 7 through 9. 2 things I ask of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. And give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of God. And so like when we look at that, like I said, I know that there's people that are going to commit their finances to God and be very generous and they're going to be hurting. I know that there's people that are going to be generous and they're going to have excess. But as a general idea or rule of thumb, I think that you see that God does take care of people who are generous. So, rewind once again back to that story I told you. You would think that with that kind of faithfulness from God, I walked away from that just like, cool, like I'll never struggle with being generous again. That's not the case. I think that I've gotten better. I really do, but I still really struggle with generosity. I still really struggle with wanting this security that I don't actually need. I still really struggle with wanting more than I actually need. And so I just think that for us as Americans, one of the reasons that we as a church are struggling where, over 50%, I think it's like 51 or 52% of our church hasn't given a penny to the local church. It's just like giving and generosity. It's just not something that is native to us as Americans. And so this practice that we are doing is designed to help us become generous people. Now, there's 4 elements to this, and I'm basically kind of reading this from this curriculum. I don't want to take somebody's intellectual property here because I think this is brilliant. Number 1, we need to learn together. So this is what this is right here. This podcast is about. Number 2, we need to practice, and we tend to do that on our own or within our family context. If you learn and you don't put into practice, then you're like the book of James, where you go and you hear but you don't do, and that is a significant problem. We need to reflect, and we need to spend time doing that on our own, where we're like, okay, I've learned, I've got the concept, I've practiced, and now I'm reflecting, okay, God, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, where am I seeing you at work, where am I seeing you moving, pushing, pulling, whatever the case may be. And then the final thing is, we take this to other people and we process it together. That right there, for me, has become one of the most helpful and healthy things that I have started kind of doing in my life, is just taking things that are abstract or taking things that I have fears about, taking things that I have doubts about. And I'll say this, like I am growing in transparency. I don't know that I know that I'm not a fully transparent person, but I'm certainly growing in that area. But even just like talking to people in certain terms, just like helping understand principles and processes of the mind and things like that, it's really, really helpful. And so as a result of that, I would say that those 4 things that practicingtheway.org has kind of laid out: learn, practice, reflect, and then process together. If we do those 4 things, we're going to become more generous people. If we don't, then you're just going to hear some teaching and nothing's really going to change. So I want us to go to the scripture. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 6 very briefly. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. I've got it pulled up on my computer here. I'm ready for you with this one. And we're going to read through verse 24. All right, so Matthew chapter 6, we're in the Sermon on the Mount, right smack dab in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. And here's what it says: do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then, if your eye is clear or healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad or unhealthy, and I use those two terms, I'm not, depending on your translation, it might say clear and healthy, or it might say bad and unhealthy. But it says, I'll reread verse 23 real quick. It says, but if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. And some of your Bible translations might say mammon in exchange for wealth. We'll get to that in just a second. There's three key things that I want to talk about in this passage. There's three key things that our curriculum highlights. Number one, verse 20 says, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Oftentimes we think literally of heaven, like where we go when we die, when we read this. And I actually think that that's a little bit of a problem. I'm going to agree with our writer here, John Mark Comer, which I say I'm going to agree. The dude is brilliant, right? So who am I to disagree with him? But at the end of the day, I do think that there can be some nuance to the ways that we approach some of these scriptures. This is an area where I agree with what he's saying. The ancient way of understanding heaven here is not necessarily in this passage. Now, there are places that talks about heaven and as a destination where we go when we die. But in this passage, these early Christians would have likely understood this not as a place where we go where we die, but literally like the investment into the spiritual realm and our spiritual life through that relationship with God. So essentially what it's saying is store up for yourselves treasures in this spiritual realm, in this relationship with God, and there moth and rust cannot destroy. Thieves cannot break in and steal that from you. Regardless of your circumstances, if you are investing in your relationship with God, that cannot be something that is stripped away from you or taken from you. And so I think that there is a huge point there that we have to understand about this passage, that when we store up treasures on earth, they can always be taken. Always be taken. The government can take them. There's that whole idea that the government can come in and now they have to pay for it, but they pay market value. But like you might have this piece of land that you really value. And this was a big thing in Jacksonville not too long ago when we were talking about putting a bypass around Jacksonville. People that own land where the bypass were going to go were essentially, they had no option. Like if the bypass was going to go in, yes, they would receive money in exchange for their land, but they would have to give up their land. And some of them were like, hey, this is family land. This is something that's been in our family for generations. And yes, we have to acknowledge that the government has the power and the authority to come in and take that in exchange for the market value. Thieves can come in and steal. Other things can happen. Stuff can decay and rot. And so when we build up for ourselves treasures on this earth, there is no guarantee that we'll have those things tomorrow. But when we store up treasures in our spiritual life, in our relationship with God, moth, nor rust, nor thieves, nor anything can come in and break or steal that thing. So, the verse 21, it says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If we store up for ourselves things on this earth, we're going to find that that's where our heart belongs. If we store up for ourselves things in the spiritual life, in the formative life with Jesus Christ, then our heart is going to belong to Him. Now let's move on to verses 22 through 23. Here's some interesting teaching here. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then, if your eye is, and so this translation I'm reading from, the New American Standard, says clear. The NIV says healthy. And you're going to find some variation of those two things in pretty much all biblical English translations. But the interesting thing is that the Greek kind of implies not necessarily healthy as we would see, like physical health, but it implies generosity. There's this implication of generosity in the health. And so it's essentially, we could say, I think with integrity, the eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is generous, your whole body will be full of light. Your whole body will be generous. But if your eye is bad, aka not generous, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if there is not generosity in you with your wealth, you're not going to find generosity with you in other areas of your life too. So if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And it's basically just like, hey, look, if your body is not generous, if you as a person are not generous, we've got real problems, because now the darkness is going to overcome, not just with our money, but in other areas as well too. And we need to take that to heart. What we do with our money, in fact, John Mark Comer on the video session of this talked about how Billy Graham, discussed at one point in time how, if we can kind of control our passions and desires about money, we're going to find that translate over into other areas of our life. And he's exactly right, at least according to this passage. If we are generous people with our finances, I think that we will be generous people with our time, with our resources, with our words of affirmation, with our encouragement to other people. Be generous with our spouses, with our kids, with our co-workers, as we share grace with them in a generous abundance. But if we don't have generosity with our money, there's a strong likelihood that we're not going to be generous with our grace, that we're not going to be generous with our words of affirmation, that we're not going to be generous in other areas of our life. So, the final element that we see here is in verse 24. It says, "No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other." And he makes it very clear here what he's talking about. This is Jesus' own words. You cannot serve God and wealth. Now, here's the crazy thing about our English translations. In our English translations, you've got everything that you need there to experience a vibrant relationship with Jesus. But when we take that next layer down and the next layer down and the next layer down, and we kind of observe some of the more ancient context of this passage or the original languages of these passages, things get a little bit more interesting, and they provide a little bit more clarity too, I would have to say. You cannot serve God and wealth. Some of your Bible translations may see the word mammon. Now, the New Testament was written in Koine Greek because that was the language of the time. That was kind of the universal language of the time, so to speak. However, more than likely, Jesus spoke Aramaic. And in this right here, Matthew, the writer of this gospel, does not translate Jesus' Aramaic word that he used in the Sermon on the Mount into Greek. He simply leaves it in its Aramaic function. So you have in verse 24, everything there is in the Koine Greek language except for that last word, which is an Aramaic word that we translate as mammon or wealth. Here's the crazy thing. People kind of date back, try to understand, well, what is mammon exactly? And more than likely, our English translations don't do justice to exactly what mammon is. So the term mammon drives all the way back to this ancient god of wealth, that we could see something definitely demonic there. Like if people worship an idol, then we have to be able to acknowledge that there is demonic activity at play there. This ancient false god of wealth was called mammon. And so when you see it in the New Testament, there's kind of this boundary that we can put on it as we try to interpret it the best way possible. On one side of the boundary, you see it like, okay, Jesus is really trying to drive home that wealth is something that people worship and you can't worship it. That's one side of the boundary. On the other side of the boundary, you see like, no. Not just is wealth something that we can worship, but like wealth is something demonic. This is not something that God is going to bless, this abundance of whatever the case may be. God does not operate in those terms. When God gives an abundance, He gives it so that it can be given away. He doesn't give it so that way it can be hoarded up. Why do I say that? Because of verses 19 through 21. Don't store up for yourselves wealth and treasures on this earth, where moth and rust can destroy. Jesus is very clear in His teaching. We ought to have what we need and not seek anything else. And so as a result of that, there are some Bible translators that say like, no. When Jesus used the term mammon, there are some commentators, I should say, that when Jesus used the term mammon, He's literally talking about something demonic here. A demonic force that tempts people with excess, that tempts people with this abundance of wealth that they do not need. And so here, either way we take it, regardless of how we kind of operate within those boundaries of understanding, we can understand that, like, hey, we as people, we can either serve God or we can serve wealth, but we can't serve both. And so how is it that we keep from becoming people who worship idols and so on and so forth? Well, we become generous people. And so within this context of becoming generous people, we want to just draw some conclusions about some things. Number one, the primary principle for this teaching today is that it is more joyful. It is better to give than to receive. It is better to give than to receive. And in doing so, why does that make sense? Well, there's been plenty of studies that have been shown that people who are more generous are actually more joyful people. We can either have an abundance mindset, or, as our curriculum talks about, we can have a scarcity mindset. A scarcity mindset is this mindset of fear and longing. I want money because I am afraid that if I don't have it, I won't have joy. I want money. Money is scarce. I want it because if I don't have it, I won't have security and safety that I so desire, and so on and so forth. That's a scarcity mindset. That is assuming that God cannot give you security, that God cannot give you safety. That is assuming that God cannot give you joy. And when we assume that about God, we dwell in this scarcity, this place of scarcity, thinking hey, the God of the universe who can do all things that are in association with His goodness, He can do all things and He can't give me what I actually need. That's a scarcity mindset. And I struggle with that. And I know that a lot of other people do too. I'm not trying to give myself an out here, and I'm not trying to give you an out here. But we just need to acknowledge that this is something that is a real struggle, especially for us as American Christians. And then the contrast to the scarcity mindset is this mindset of abundance, that God can give us everything we need and more. Now, should we anticipate that more to come in physical things? No, not necessarily. Sometimes you will see people who are blessed beyond what they need, but again, they're blessed in that context so that way they can give more as well too. I think that the more comes in that, hey, we're going to have what we need spiritually and oftentimes physically. We just have to be able to acknowledge that. We're going to have what we need physically and spiritually, and the more we press into this abundance mindset, the more we're going to see, hey, God is that much better than I thought. There's more joy than what I thought possible. There is more love than I ever could have imagined. And there's this abundance mindset. Now think of it in this context here. Children, right? I have 3 little girls. And my 3 little girls don't have to worry about anything. They don't have to worry about anything. Why? Because Courtney and I, we have been blessed with good jobs. And we take care of their needs. They're not walking around thinking hey, man, I just have this significant need in my life that's not being met. Now, are there things that they want that are not being met? Sure. I'm sure that all of my girls want a pony. We're not going to be able to provide that for them, at least not right now. However, they have everything that they need. And I just need to be honest. I think that me and Courtney are good parents, but we're not perfect. And I don't even know if I put us in the great category. But our Heavenly Father is great. He is perfect. And when He pours out His abundant love and His abundant riches, we can rest assured that we're going to have an abundance of everything that we need. And that is the mind shift that we have to adopt for ourselves as Christians so that we don't store up treasures here on this earth, so that we don't have ungenerous eyes that affect all elements of our spiritual life, and so that we don't worship this idol of money and wealth that so many Americans have. It is better to give than to receive, and at the end of the day, if you're going to actually believe that, it's going to be something that you have to go and participate with. So, this is where we close. I want to give you something that we are doing here at the church, because in our booklets, you're going to see practices that they encourage you to do, and we just want to be very specific for us at Central Baptist Church. Take your booklet and pray about it. And if there's something else that you want to do or feel called to do, by all means, go and do it. But we have an opportunity for you to be very generous, and we have a way for you to practice generosity and experience that it is better to give than to receive. And that is through our Central Christmas Store. All right, so let me just very briefly break it down to you. I know you've heard about it in a lot of different ways, but our Central Christmas Store is very, very simple. We are going to ask you, we as the staff, we're not going to like put this burden on you and not participate in it ourselves. But we have a community that every year come this time, there are parents who want to provide Christmas presents for their kids. They want to be able to give that joy, like that same joy of giving rather than receiving. They want that joy and they want to share that joy with their kids because they love their kids. And one of the things that I have found in my experience, when people come to the church and they say, hey, I don't have enough money to buy gifts for my kids. I'm not asking for you to pay for everything. I just need help. The vast majority of parents want that. Now, why do they want that? I am convinced, I believe that they want that because they understand that there is a certain level of dignity that is maintained, even for the person who can't go and get their child what they want to give their child. Like there's a certain level of dignity that they have whenever they say, hey, like, you know, my child, like I might not have paid for all of this, but I worked hard to make this available to you. And folks, we're Christians. We want to give dignity to people. Like we want to be generous in providing opportunities for people to have dignity and to be able to take care of some of these needs that they feel like they have. And so what we're going to do is encourage our central people. Now, there's two ways that the book kind of lines things out. Hey, here's a practice, but then here's a going deeper practice. So let me just tell you what we would like to see from everybody in our church. We would like for everybody in our church, as just the practice, let's just get started with this. Let's just baseline. We would like to see everybody go and buy a gift for a child that you will probably never meet. Buy a gift between the realm of $25 and $200 pre-tax. There's a reason for those, but I won't get into that now. $25 and $200 pre-tax. And all you got to do is bring that gift, brand new, up here to the church with the receipt, and you're going to hand it off. And you will probably never know who's going to receive that. And here's what we're going to do with that as a church. We're going to take that and we're going to make a store out of those new gifts. And we're going to charge people some money because we want them to have that dignity. And essentially, they're going to be able to buy these new gifts at 75% off. We're only going to charge 25% of what the gift is actually worth. And then with that money that we receive from those people, that 25%, we're going to take that back and we're going to reinvest it in those people and offer counseling services through Tapestry Counseling, which now meets in our building. We're going to offer financial counseling services if that's something that they want. And then we're just going to offer prayer to those people. Now, prayer doesn't cost anything, but those two services will cost something. And so we're going to take that money and back and reinvest it into those people to help them get some things if they so choose. If they so choose to get some counseling either for themselves or for their family or maybe for a family member or some financial counseling, we want to be able to do that. And so this is going to be something that 100% of everything that is done goes back into our community. And if we have any money left over at the end of the year, which I don't think that we will, but if we do, it'll just go into next year's Central Christmas Store and the ministries that spawn from that. So that is a way that we are encouraging all of our Central Baptist people to give and give generously this year. Now, your booklet is going to talk about going deeper. So here's how I would encourage you to go deeper. This is just a suggestion for you that I ask you to pray about and consider. I have 3 kids, all right? Now, it would be generous of me to go and buy one gift for a kid I will never meet. But I think going deeper is looking at my 3 girls and saying, hey, I'm going to buy 3 gifts from my 3 girls. But I can buy 3 gifts for 3 kids that I'll never meet before I buy gifts for my 3 girls. And so if you would like to take this exercise and go a little bit deeper with it, here is the call to you. Before you go, and maybe you already have, I know that some of you are really on top of this stuff. So I guess in principle, the idea is like, hey, for every kid that you have, buy a gift for another kid that you'll never meet. All right, so there's kind of the 2 ways that we here at Central Baptist are encouraging you to experience this practice. It would be, go get at least one gift. But B, if you want to go deeper with that, go and purchase a gift for every one of your own kids. Go and purchase that gift for somebody else. Now, if you are a grandparent, and you're like, okay, well, my kids are grown or whatever, I don't know about that. Well, hey, like maybe for all your grandkids, I don't know, like just whatever that looks like for you, think about it, pray about it, and take it as deep as God wants you to. I know that that's difficult. It's difficult for me in lots of different areas of our life. But the Holy Spirit's going to give us the power and the courage that we need to do what He wants us to do. And He's going to give us the clarity too. So be listening, be available. Want to draw your attention, last thing before we go. If we only do this curriculum through the learning stage, which is kind of happening right now, and we don't put it into practice, we don't reflect on it with us and God, and we don't process it together with other people, we're not going to experience the fullness of it, all right? So even if you don't do all 4 of those things, then I would say learn, practice, and then either process together or reflect on your life. Do 3 of them, but I would encourage you to do all 4. So anyways, with that being said, that is our first session in our generosity practice from practicingtheway.org. And the main principle here is it is better to give, it is more joyful to give than to receive. We hope that you experience that joy. We'll talk to you next time.